A huge beef civil war just got started between brutal hardcore kids and brutal death metal kids. I'm here to explain how everything just went down because it is hilarious. So pretty much first off, this band called Exfixiated, which I have talked about before on this channel, they just posted some merch that says FNSE, meaning New Standard Elite. Now, New Standard Elite is a brutal death metal label. Pretty much all the bands are like blast bands like Disgorge, Despondency. So pretty much that style of brutal death metal, like Putridity, stuff like that. Now, Exfixiate is what we call brutal hardcore. Kind of like this new wave of like brutal death metal combined with hardcore with like very low quality, big reverb. So sort of like bands like Final Resting Place, Exfixiated, like I mentioned. But so Exfixiated, like I mentioned, said FNSE. So they just called out half of the current brutal death metal scene because we're kind of divided with like the hardcore kids and the true death metal kids. So then all these brutal death metal bands on New Standard Elite started making Daze Records shirts. So now Daze Records kind of didn't really have anything to do with this, but Daze Records as itself is a very big, prevalent label for these bands like Final Resting Place. So it's kind of like the homestead of brutal hardcore right now. So they took the heat. The first band was Virologist that did it, and then another band, Submerged, both on New Standard Elite. So then Daze Records responded, and they reposted Submerged, and they said, somebody come get they smelly cousin, yo. Then all the brutal death metal hardcore kids are fighting. One half of them are saying, you know, F brutal hardcore, while the brutal hardcore kids are saying F brutal death metal kids. The other half are just kind of saying, like, both of you guys are freaking morons, or saying you guys are both really stupid. So then, yeah, people are saying, like, it's the war of Disgorge clones versus dehumanized clones. So, then Daze, like, just randomly does another one. They post the Virologist, and for some reason they post my actual story of me egging it on. So my name's on Daze. I'm getting like all these follow requests from hardcore kids, but they say these metal freaks just yelling into the ether, yo. So Daze, the hardcore label, just called out like metalheads, like the entire brutal death metal scene, just saying that like metalheads are freaking like retarded. Me personally, I think that if you're even into hardcore or death metal or thrash metal, I think that you're a freaking outcast. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, now we have like all the brutal death metal kids saying like F brutal hardcore. All the brutal hardcore kids are saying F blast. Brutal death metal bands F NSE. So now there is a current civil war in brutal death metal and brutal hardcore. So kind of the hardcore and death metal scene, there is a current civil war. And this isn't the first time, you know, hardcore kids and metal kids have been fighting. You know, like you had the Waking the Cadaver kids that used to start fights or get into fights with the actual, you know, deathcore guys or whatever. And, you know, back in the 80s in New York, you had like Agnostic Front and Leeway, the crossover DRI stuff, fighting with the metalheads, you know. So punk and metal and have always been kind of at war, but really prevalent was for these scenes was like the metalcore kids, and the deathcore kids getting in fights with like death metal guys and thrash metal guys in like the 2000s. Now it seems that the Civil War has once again reignited because some kid had to make a shirt that said FNSE. So that is the current Civil War happening right now in brutal death metal and brutal hardcore. So the hardcore scene and the death metal scene are currently in battle. No longer is the scene connected. Okay, so that is the current basis of this. So we have New Standard Elite brutal death metal fighting against Daze hardcore kids.